Hello everyone, and welcome to another episode of Crafted Creations. Today we're going to go ahead and use this color pour resin mold making kit. This one is a two-part process that I found at a local hobby store. We're going to go ahead and use some of these small little measuring cups here, as they have milliliter measurements on the side. These come in 20 to 40 millimeter, so we're going to use that. That'll be perfect for this two-part process. We're also going to use these craft sticks and a dropper. That got inspired to make this video because the new Cobb Vanth that I recently picked up on clearance comes with a really awesome scarf, much better than the tiny little one that came on the original figure. So I wanted to replace the scarf from the original figure with the new one, but then I'm just left with a Cobb Vanth here with no scarf. So I decided, let's see if I can go ahead and make a mold for one, so that way he's not left hanging with that tiny little scarf. So we're going to go ahead and get started here. And first we're going to go ahead and figure out where we want to place the stick. Now when you're making a mold, you have to think about things in reverse. You're going to be making a negative image of the item that you're casting, and then when you pour your casting resin, it's going to create a positive image back in its place. Now, when you're making a mold, you have to keep in mind that you're going to have to cut to get your piece back out once the mold's been poured, and that leaves a seam line. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to place a craft stick on the back of the scarf here and use some polymer sculpting putty to hold that in place. When you put it inside of these little measuring cups here, you want to make sure that the part you're going to be casting doesn't touch the bottom. Otherwise, you're going to be left with a really bad cast that you need to have that completely submerged in the mold maker. So we're going to go ahead and start with part A. Pour that in there. Then we'll add our part B. We're going to give that a good mix. You want to make sure not to mix it too hard, otherwise you'll add quite a bit of air bubbles in there. So I'll go ahead and mix that here just a little bit. Now the first one that I poured was for another project I'm attempting, so I poured a second batch here, and we're going to go ahead and put the scarf right inside. Now that that's done, we're going to let this sit overnight for 24 hours. That's going to give you a nice hard mold there. What you want to do is first touch the top, make sure if you can leave a fingernail imprint in there, and that goes back to shape, then you know that it's done, as long as it's not wet and tacky. Now here's the part that is tricky. When you're cutting the seam, you want to keep in mind where you're going to be pouring the resin in. So we don't want the seam line anywhere in a visible spot. We're going to want to cut that down the back. So here I'm going to go ahead and insert my X-Acto knife. Now you do have to be very careful when you are doing these cuts to make sure you don't slice into the part that you're casting. There's a couple different types of methods. This one is kind of a loose interpretation of what's called a jeweler's cut. The jeweler's cuts are usually jagged lines that are used to hide the seam a little bit easier. So what you're going to do is try to hold your mold open and just slice that a little bit all the way down the seam here. And since the scarf has a ring that goes around the neck, we're going to have to cut a T shape at the bottom to get those pieces out. Now once that's out, we're going to go ahead and start to pour our casting resin here. I went ahead and I put the molds back in some of the measuring cups, so that way the casting resin doesn't leak out the sides. This casting resin is also a two-part process as well. It's equal parts A to equal parts B. So when I did the mold, I poured 20 milliliters of the silicone and 20 the hardener. And same thing with this, I'm using 20 milliliters of the part 1 casting resin and 20 of the hardener. Now this stuff is very, very smelly, so you do want to keep this in a well-ventilated area. If you have pets, keep these clear of them as well, because this stuff can be toxic. You're going to let that also sit for 24 hours, and that's going to give you a nice clear resin cast here. Go ahead and clean off some of the chaff if you get a little bit of excess there. And now I'm going to paint this up and see how it turns out. We're going to use a little bit of our bright red, a little bit of our chestnut brown, and mix those up a little bit just to darken up the red. We'll go ahead and cover this here. After we get this painted up, we're going to go ahead and do a quick little black wash on there to darken it up just a little bit, and then also bring out some of the detail in the folds of the fabric on the scarf here. Now if you notice, the cast didn't come out perfect. There is a tiny little piece at the bottom that looks a little frayed. And I actually like that for this, because I'm going to use the original that we made the cast of on the original release Cobb Vanth with the armored, and then I'm going to use this one, which looks slightly more worn, on the unarmored Cobb Vanth, because he's seen a little bit more action there, so he's probably got some battle damage and some weathering. So I got that painted up, got a nice coat on there. I'm going to go ahead and let this dry for a few minutes. When it added a little bit of a black wash there, and I'm going to go ahead and just touch up some details here, give it another coat. Dried a little bit darker because you started to see some of the resin shine through underneath. Add a little bit more brown and a touch more red. Alright, so here we're going to go ahead and take a little bit of black. We're going to water that down a bunch. And to do a wash, all you do is you just take a very watered down brush that has a tiny little bit of black paint in there. You're going to dab that into the crevices, and then just take your brush and spread that around a little bit. If it gets too clumped up in one area, as long as you used enough water, it won't dry right away, so you have time to manipulate that paint that was mixed in with the water and push that around into the cracks where you want it to go. And there you have it, folks. Here is your introduction to basic mold making. Now keep in mind, with great power comes great responsibility. You don't want to use this method to make bootlegs or knockoffs. I recommend only using this to make customs. And as always, folks, stay crafty.